Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well. Today I have 4 Reddit stories for you guys. All credit goes to the original posters of these stories, and I will link them in the description. 911, what's your emergency? Hello? My 8-year-old voice trembled. Is this emergency services? It sure is, the cheerful male voice on the other end on the phone line answered. What's the trouble, young man? I frowned. Young man? Weren't they supposed to say 911, what's your emergency? Maybe it was his first day. Either way, there was no time to waste. Something's wrong with my mom. She fell down all of a sudden. I pressed the phone to my ear and leaned back. My mother lay where she collapsed just minutes ago. Oh no, that's too bad. Someone will be over right away. Click. I dropped the phone and crept over to my mother. The faint rise and fall of her chest was the only way I even knew she was alive. Wait, I hadn't told the ambulance people our address. I ran back to the phone and dialed 911 again. 151 Cliffmore Way, 151 Cliffmore Way, I shouted into the receiver, then hung up. I shut my eyes tight. I wanted to scream, to shatter into a million pieces like the glass that had fallen from my mother's grasp just before she collapsed. But all I could do was wait, hold her hand, and pray. It felt like an eternity before the doorbell rang. I sprang to my feet, but froze when I turned the corner. A short, brown-haired white man was peering through the window with a grin on his face. He rang the bell again, more instantly this time, and I noticed he wore a red nurse's uniform. I let out a sigh of relief. The ambulance people were here. Everything was going to be okay. I yanked the door open. Hello there, young man, the smiling man exclaimed. I read the name, Marbus, on his name tag. Right beside the pens and stethoscope. Where's the unlucky lady? He asked. You mean my mom? I stammered. She's in here. 2 expressionless assistants in identical red uniforms rolled a gurney to where my mother lay, surrounded by shards of glittering glass. Up, up, and away! Nurse Marbus rubbed his hands together excitedly while my mother was loaded into the gurney and rolled out the door. A jolt of helpless fear shot through me. They were taking my mother away. Mister, can I ride with my mom to the hospital? I asked the smiling man. Hospital? Nurse Marbus wrinkled his forehead, confused. Oh, there's no need for that. We're professionals, you see. As the assistants loaded my mother into the back of the black ambulance, I looked over their shoulders at the sharp and jagged tools hanging from its walls. They weren't like any medical instruments that I've ever seen. We'll take excellent care of your mother, the smiling man went on, and call as soon as you can to see her. Nurse Marbus leaped into the rear compartment. His expressionless assistants climbed into the cab, and the black ambulance began to back out of the driveway. I ran behind it, waving my hands. I wanted to yell at them to stop, but I was just a kid. Who was I to contradict the professionals? I was still standing there 5 minutes later, when flashing red and blue lights were skidding around the street corner. The 2 police officers muttered into their radios and looked worriedly at the scene in front of them. A crying child, a wide-open door. Did you call 911? A blonde policewoman asked. I did, I nodded, but they already came. They took my mom away. The 2 police officers looked at each other. I'm afraid that's not possible. Received a call from this location, a child shouting an address, and we're the ones to respond. It's been 20 years since that black ambulance drove off with my mother. I never learned what became of her, or of the strange nurses in the red uniforms. My foster parents said I made it all up. Trauma, they said. I had to forget, move on. But around midnight last night, I received a strange phone call. A woman's gravely raspy voice, almost inaudible over the screams and crackling flames in the background, a voice I recognized. They told me I could call. We're going to be together again, son. In the fields. If you're reading this, it means I lived long enough to click post, but probably not much longer. I'll start from the beginning. About a month ago, I was coming back from a friend's house after a night of partying, and along my drive, I decided to pull off into the field to piss. Now, where I live, it's not acceptable to drink and drive, but it's a lot safer than the city. My feet shakily met the soft earth and I looked at my surroundings. The field was tall, barely crop, that was about 4 foot tall. I looked out into the tall grass as I finished and saw the strangest deer I've ever seen. The deer was insane. It towered over the barley like it was nothing. This deer was the size of a moose, and the antlers were gigantic. I've seen my fair share of 10-point bucks, but this must have been a 500-point buck. His head adorned in this massive crown of antlers, but they looked sick and malformed. The antlers were dark and twisted together unnaturally, and had dozens of points facing every direction. The pale moonlight shone through the crown of bone, and it was gone. I figured it must have ducked down below the barley. I cursed myself for not having my gun in my truck and gave up on the potential prey. As I was driving off, I nearly wrecked my truck. The deer was up the road a bit, just on the edge of the field, luminous eyes reflecting my high beams. This isn't what caused me to crash, though. It reared up on its hind legs and stood almost vertical. It must have been 6 foot tall like this, and it just stood there, staring at me as I drove past. But when I checked the rear view, it was out of sight again. The next day, I told my friends about this, and they gave me the usual shit. I was drunk, I'm bullshitting, I just had a weird dream when I blacked out. That's fine, I know what I saw anyways. On the way home from another wasted day, I traveled past the field again. Sober this time, I promise. Lo and behold, the buck again suddenly rising from the barley. Waning sunlight, I could see him better. His antlers were dark, almost charred in appearance. His back was hunched unnaturally as he stood in that hunched bipedal stance. His fur was a splotchy brown on black pattern, and his lips were pulled back, what could have been a smile, with 2 rows of large crooked white teeth. His eyes were wide and unyielding as they stared. The overall appearance of the deer reminded me of that wasting disease they find sometimes, or some kind of birth defect or developmental issues. My eyes flicked back to the road out of habit, and again the buck was gone. The third day I was driving home from work past the field again, and although I couldn't see it at first, when I glanced in my rear view, there he was, at the very edge of the field. This trend continued for a while, where we wouldn't be there. I'd look around, then he'd be there, only to disappear moments after. I noticed about a week in he was completely past the fields. I could see him in the middle of the road. It was as if he was moving one large step at a time. Here's where my current situation comes into play. 2 nights ago, I caught a glimpse of it outside my house at the edge of the property. Every time I'd see him again, he'd be closer. A few hours ago, I saw him in the kitchen, a few feet from me, staring at me with his gigantic head craned down so he could stand inside. I locked myself in my room and panicked. I knew he was getting too close. In my panic, foolishly spun around, and there he was, inches from my face. I knew I couldn't look away or he'd be gone again, and then he would reach me. I picked up a small hand mirror and slowly walked around to my desk and began writing this. Receiving a notification, I foolishly looked away. He's gone, but as long as I don't look away from the screen, he can't appear again. I made the mistake of looking past my monitor into my reflection, only to see those familiar eyes behind me. I feel a heavy, ice-cold cloven hoof pressing onto my shoulder. I feel shallow breaths push between crooked teeth on the back of my neck. I can feel those turgid lips in the unnatural smile. If you ever see something unnatural or something you know you shouldn't have, don't look. If you must look, never look away. The door peeper. Have you ever woken up at night from a sound you can barely hear, seeing a shape you can barely see in your door frame? I've been collecting testimonies of people that have stood, or rather laid, face to face with this entity I've taken to calling the door peeper. Maybe it's not terribly creative, but it describes the thing pretty well. An encounter goes something like this. Sometime in the middle of the night, around 4 or 5 a.m., you'll hear a soft knock. 30 seconds later begins the creaking of the doorknob or handle, or however the door to your bedroom opens. Very slowly the door will open, as if what's behind it is trying its best not to wake you up. Makes me wonder just how many people sleep through the peeper's nightly visits and don't even know he visited. When the door is opened sufficiently wide, the peeper will take a single step inside your room. He'll lean his slender, hairless body through the doorframe and watch. That's all he'll do. For about 5 minutes, he'll watch you sleep, or cower in fear if you're awake. Occasionally, he'll whisper a word or two, so quiet they can easily be mistaken for the wind. Then he'll leave. He seems to have no hostile intentions, at least not if left undisturbed. Once he closes the door, he'll continue to the other rooms in your house until he's sated his curiosity by surveying each one of those 5 minutes. Then he'll disappear as quickly as he appeared. He never comes back. Not the same house, not the same people. A single visit is all you'll ever get. A once-in-a-lifetime experience, if you will. His visits are random, and those that have never seen him don't believe in the story. So there's very few peeper hunters out there. People aren't too keen on letting strangers camp out their bedrooms for the possibility of some creature peering through their slightly ajar door in the early morning. Just one warning, though. To the braver sort among you, don't turn on your light or shine your phone on the direction of the door you just heard creak. If you're up late and find yourself in a lit room when you hear the single soft knock, immediately turn the lights out and step away from the door. Stand still for 5 minutes it takes for him to leave. The peeper doesn't like being seen. I can't tell you what happens or what this thing actually looks like, because I lay frozen in bed that day it visited. 3 years ago, I too was awoken up by the creaking of the door, fighting against my sleep, my eyes half-lidded. I tried to make out the figure standing in my doorframe. By the time I properly woke up, my door already closed again. Something inside me told me I shouldn't get up. To stay in bed and pull the covers over my head, I listened to that something. My father, however, did not. I heard his bare feet stomping on the tiled floor of the hallway towards the bathroom. He swung it open, turned on the light, and walked towards the toilet. When suddenly, even from my room, I could hear it, the soft knock on the bathroom door. My father sleepily mumbling occupied, the door to the bathroom creaking open, and my dad's last ever words, I said "Occu." I never saw him again after that. When I woke up the next morning, still clutching my sheets in fear, the light in the bathroom was still on. My mother asked me if I'd heard my father leave for work. I told the truth. I heard him go into the bathroom and nothing after. It's been 3 years since, and the police has stopped searching for my father long ago. I don't know where he went. I've been trying to find him, but there's no way to know where the peeper will pop up next. And even if he did, what would I do? It's something I've spent a lot of time thinking on, but I just have no answer. Everyone else I've been able to find with the similar testimonies, each of their experiences slightly different. A different number of doors opened before he left, a different amount of time spent before the doors closed, different whispered words while he watches, or a family member or pet taken and never returned. One thing is similar in all of their testimonies, however. One thing I haven't been able to find the meaning of. No, everyone unanimously agrees that right before the peeper closes the door to a bedroom, he whispers, "Not this one." The Nosebleeder. About the movie that gave everyone nosebleeds. It was much more dangerous than that. I was the only survivor. My biggest worry is that it was entirely correct. I am worried that the movie, The Nosebleeder, the one I watched, is a sequel that everyone is waiting for. I can remember all of my friends, but I can't remember their faces. I always sat in the back, so I could be a peanut gallery without bothering anyone. It was just how I was. Movies were often worth making comments about, and I saw no point in watching a movie with library silence, when movies are loud anyway. One of my friends got bootlegged copy from someone in an email. My friend had it on a laptop downloaded. All of my friends gathered at my friend's house, and we were set to watch the sequel early. It wasn't supposed to be out for about a month, on Christmas, so we were very excited about the release of our new favorite movie. There were snacks and chairs in the garage where the TV had to be moved. Everyone excited to watch the movie early. We gathered and sat around while it was cast from the laptop to the TV. We had the bootlegged sequel before Christmas when the movie was set to release. What we watched, however, was not the right movie. It was something left over from a different kind of Christmas from long ago. It was horrifying. We turned it off and sat in mortified silence. My heart was beating from the film we had watched. It was not the movie we were expecting. It was something real and terrifying that someone had filmed. It was beyond anything comprehensible, and it had killed the participants. We had watched the singers of the evil Christmas songs die horribly as it grasped them with its different parts and twisted them in half. It had continued to move towards the fleeing congregation, but then it was when we turned it off. The angle of the camera was all wrong, far too centered and focused. Someone had known what was going to happen, to have filmed it like that. There was more to the movie, but I couldn't remember it. The clarity and brevity of it is what strolled through my mind. I just got the idea that someone had deliberately made the film and rejected the rest. It was easy to do, after all. It was just a movie. Except we all knew deep down that it was a real denial is a powerful thing, a traditional survival mechanism, except when it puts us back into danger. There was no thought about the copy of the movie we had. We just deleted it and it was gone. But it wasn't long before the symptoms started. It began when all of us, one by one, got nosebleeds. The profuse bleeding would not stop. We were all scattered at that point, but met back up at the hospital. Since the emergency room had a resident virus expert, I overheard a recommendation to quarantine all of us. We got quarantined soon after when we started getting headaches, dizziness, and nausea. It was soon after that, when the rest of those who had watched the movie arrived, they were taken straight to quarantine. There we were, all reunited and discussed what was happening. We got much sicker as we remained there. The symptoms became flu-like, fevers and delirium. It felt like I was asleep and awake at the same time, my body paralyzed while I stared, unable to wake up. It felt dreamy and horrible. We started to feel better, but not before the first one of us went blind. It was a day later when another, and then another day before another. Every day or two, another of us went blind. Then the worst happened. The first person who went blind began to rot, their flesh becoming moldy and pocked. Then the next person, all the while more people, one by one, were going blind. I hadn't gone blind, but I was the only one who hadn't. When the first that began rotting died of septic shock, their bowels emptied and they cried out in a lung-emptying scream of death and agony. I realized the only difference between me and the rest of my friends was their exposure to the nosebleeder. I did recover after their symptoms terminated. They didn't, but I did. I had to learn to understand why, to ease my survivor's guilt. I had watched the Nosebleed movie from the back row and had missed parts of it as I looked away. I had almost talked from the back row over the evil Christmas songs being sang. My complaints had drowned out the sounds of evil the most for me. Somehow it was enough to let me recover. After all of my friends were dead, the movie stopped playing in my head. I felt better, except the stench of their dead bodies. I was taken out of quarantine and checked on my doctors in special suits. When they found no signs of contagion on me or the autopsies of my friends, they decided to let me go. I went home and tried to recover. It was frightening how quickly it had all began. Most of the time I had spent just sitting while they ran tests. Although it had felt like the horrible part had lasted longer, it was only a few days. Or perhaps it was a whole week. It was, at first, very difficult to recall any details leading up to or about what had happened. I still felt afraid, realizing that something was wrong. I worried that the movie was the actual one set for a release on Christmas. I almost forgot that worry. I almost felt better. Unfortunately, there was a calendar where I could stare and piece together the timeline, slowly comprehending each moment of the tragedy. I was about to move on with my life, try to be normal again, but I knew I couldn't. It only took an epiphany about the date I was staring at. I decided to try and make a note of it, to piece together what I knew or could remember. Lately, that seems to be working. Recently, when I almost felt better, I looked and saw that it was almost Christmas. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking to my channel, and I will see you on the next one.